Welcome back to Sports Call here on Tiger 95.9. Ryan Lavoie, Brooks Childress with you here today from Digital Drive. It's SEC Media Days 2026 in Tampa, and we are now pleased to be joined by Peter Rauterkus here of AL.com. Peter, the time is greatly appreciated. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Now, again, Peter, first time getting you on the show, so appreciate you stopping by today. Again, covering all things Auburn for AL.com. And, Peter, just take us back to Tuesday a little bit and even Monday night with the ambush and Byrum Brown and company accompanying Alex Golesh here. Just what have you made of their commentary as we've gone through the week and kind of get their confidence level getting closer and closer to fall practice?
Yeah, I think at SEC Media Days for Auburn, things have largely gone as expected. You know, one thing that stood out to me about Alex Golesh since he's been here, anytime he's talked, whether it's, in front of a camera, whether it's a press conference, whether it's just videos we've seen of him talking to the team, he's always very detailed. He comes off as confident, comes off as somebody who knows what he wants to do and is prepared to do it, and I think we saw more of that at SC Media Days this week. It was, when he talked to some people, some of the reporters at Ambush, we saw that. Obviously, when he was on the main stage, we saw that. Electronic media, we saw that. One thing that I thought was interesting was when he was asked about goals in year one, and he talked about how, more of the goal was just setting standards and creating identity for the program. It's, different from, take Hugh Freeze, for example, who I remember at SC Media Days, wasn't his first season saying, we expect to compete for the college football playoff this season. Obviously couldn't deliver. So, yeah, I think, what we saw this week is largely what we've seen from Alex Golesh since he's been at Auburn.
Is there anything that you take away from anything the players said about what type of culture they're building there in Auburn?
Yeah, similar to Alex Golesh, I think it's a lot of what we heard throughout spring practice, a lot of what we heard, kind of in January after he got here. It's, Byrum Brown is, I think, been the best one to talk to about that as somebody who's probably knows Golesh better than just about anybody else on the team. I mean, he's been not only on Golesh's teams for all three of his seasons at USF, but he was the quarterback. He was the extension of Golesh on the field. There was probably nobody who was closer to him. And I think that's a big reason why, whether it's media days, whether it's all these events, Byrum Brown has always been kind of the representative to come with Golesh. And I think you talking to him, it kind of reminds me of talking to Golesh a little bit. He's kind of likes to be the same kind of detailed, where he's confident, but he's not necessarily abrasive or cocky either. So yeah, I think it was a good showing from him and the players, and I think it speaks to where and how Golesh wants the culture at Auburn to be.
And when you're looking at Byrum Brown, obviously that relationship with Alex Golesh for so many years at South Florida, obviously so many players coming from USF, and you can throw in the top receivers expected to be at Auburn from USF. Talk about Cole Best at center. Where does that leave Auburn's offense in terms of expectations, and kind of how are we quantifying the move from the American Conference into the SEC? But again, knowing that there's a lot of continuity there.
It's interesting, because on one side, that's all 100% true. I mean, when you've got a new coaching staff, a new offense, a new system being implemented, it's a huge plus to be able to bring your quarterback with you, be able to bring your center with you. You mentioned Cole Best, and everyone talks about having Byrum Brown and having the receivers, but it's potentially even more important and even bigger deal that Byrum Brown is with the guy who was the starting center last year in an offense that says unique is the one that Alex Golesh and offensive coordinator Joe Gordon run. So that's huge. I think the biggest question, though, with that is obviously this offense was really good at USF. The system worked. The players are very good. But, the American, the SEC, obviously there's going to be a jump there. I think, to a degree, like some of these guys have experience, like Chad Nimrod, for example, someone that Alex Golesh has said has had a really good summer. He started his career at Tennessee, has proven himself a little bit. Byrum Brown looked good against SEC competition when they played Florida last year. But I think the question is, what is that going to look like week after week, especially someone like Byrum Brown who likes to run when he's taking hits from SEC players week after week? What's that going to look like, and how is this group going to respond? I think there's, reason to be optimistic, but I think that's still a big question for them to answer.
Peter, have you gotten the sense kind of around media days, because I know in our interviews we've observed a lot of people kind of talking up Auburn a little bit and being optimistic, and obviously with us operating in Auburn there's going to be a lot of optimism, there's going to be a lot of joy for something new, but I also feel like national personalities are talking up Auburn a little bit too. Is that the sense you are getting, that not only within Auburn's walls is there optimism, but also outside?
I think anytime you have a new coach who comes in and says the right things and kind of generates confidence, you're going to get that. I think, you look at where Auburn was last year in the conversation and Hugh Freeze's last season compared to now. I think it's easier to be optimistic when you look at a guy like Alex Golesh, who rebuilt South Florida successfully, and now he's come here, and there hasn't been much negativity around the program since he's gotten here. He's brought in a good class, he's gotten a good quarterback, the recruiting's been going well. There really hasn't been much to be down about or complain about. So I think when you have that, I think it's natural that not only just around Auburn is there going to be people hyping up the team, but I think nationally as well, because there isn't as much bad to talk about. And I think that's been a good thing from Golesh this offseason. I think something that he's really tried to make sure of, and I think he's done a good job so far.
You mentioned about this coaching staff and bringing a lot of guys from USF. Guy he didn't bring was the defensive coordinator, DJ Durkin, carrying over from the Hugh Freeze regime. What have you taken, at least from the spring and into the summer, about that working relationship between Golesh and DJ Durkin, who's been at Auburn for a little bit?
I think it was a huge point of emphasis. At least Golesh has said it was a huge point of emphasis to keep and retain DJ Durkin. Especially when you look at Auburn last year, it was the offense obviously struggled, but the defense is what kept a lot of these games, even against good teams, close. So, you can kind of think of it like, all right, well, let's try and keep that the same, but, bring in a guy who can kind of fix the offense. And now you've got Golesh, who is an offensive-minded head coach. I remember when we were talking to Alex Golesh shortly after, the news came out that DJ Durkin was staying, he said that, DJ Durkin is somebody that he would try to hire if he was a head coach anywhere. So I think that says a lot about what Alex Golesh thinks of DJ Durkin. I mean, I think just the fact that he wanted to retain him says a lot about what he thinks of him. So I think it's definitely an advantage for Auburn this season, especially with some of the guys on that defense along with Durkin who are returning with him.
Talk to me a little bit about this Florida game in Week 3. I know that ultimately you got to take care of Baylor first, and then obviously Southern Miss Week 2, but a lot of people pointing towards that Florida game in terms of getting the opportunity to finally play them at home for the first time in a long time, getting it under the lights of Jordan Hare, and then the linkage between John Summerall and between, of course, Alex Golesh. What do you make of that game? Are we overselling it to think it is a huge game, or do you think that this could set the tone for at least season number 1?
Yeah, no, I think it is going to be a big one. Obviously it's early in the season. It's the SEC opener for both teams. You could say Auburn maybe got a little bit of advantage because they played Baylor in Week 1. I think, Florida, their first 2 games, I forget who it is, but they've got an FCS opponent and they've got a G5 opponent in those first 2 games. So it really will be Florida's first test, and it's going to be at Jordan Hare Stadium at night, which is another factor that I think favors Auburn a little bit. But 2 teams that I think are very similar, 2 teams that are similar in their talent level. Obviously both have a first-year head coach, 2 coaches that are familiar with each other as well from their time in the American. It's also John Summerall, who is somebody who is rumored and reportedly someone that Auburn went after in its coaching search before they landed on Golesh. I think there's a lot of storylines going into that game that make it big, but just purely from what it means for the season, I think getting a win in that game for Auburn is huge, just being able to start on the right foot. I mean, I remember 2 years ago, Auburn's schedule was kind of lined up similarly, where they had their first 5 games at home, and they all looked manageable. And I remember, we're sitting around thinking, okay, Auburn could win 4, maybe even all 5 of these games. And now you go into Georgia 4-1, 5-0, and you're feeling good. Well, obviously remember how that happened. They lost a few games they weren't, expected to lose. But I think this year, with it being similar, if you can start things off with the win over Florida at home, it would be huge just going into the rest of SEC play.
And you look at that rest of that schedule, you've got that brutal month of October where you're not at home a lot. You do get LSU at home, but it's not where I think a lot of Auburn fans would want it. It's an 11 a.m. kick. Then you get to a more manageable part of the schedule down the stretch. Talk a little bit about what you think the expectations are for this team record-wise when you go into 2026.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think the biggest thing is improvement. I think obviously this is a team that didn't even make a bowl game in each of the last 2 seasons. Then before that, they went 6-7. Haven't had a winning record since the 2020 season. And so obviously improving on that, but I think they want to be better than just 6-6 or 7-6 as well. I think a 7 or 8 win season, honestly, would be, a really good thing for this team. I also think that at its best, you look at some of these games, a few things go Auburn's way, and, why can't they win more than that? Why can't they, get to 8 or 9 or even 10? I don't see this team as one that necessarily contends for the SEC or for the College Football Playoff this season, but you want to see improvement. And I think you get to 7-8 wins. I think that's when excitement can finally start to creep back in when you look at, what could be to come in the Alex Golesh era.
And Peter, before we let you go, obviously this is the first time we've had you on our program, and we were talking a little bit about, before the show, a little bit about you growing up in the state of Alabama and then going to school in the Southeastern Conference. What has it meant to you to be covering Auburn and be working in this, obviously, SEC environment that you're so used to growing up in?
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. I mean, I grew up in Birmingham, was born in Baton Rouge, went to school at LSU, so I've been around the SEC kind of my whole life. I mean, my first love in sports was, SEC football. I remember, we moved to Birmingham when I was about 5 years old. I remember walking into kindergarten and someone asked me, so who do you go for, Alabama or Auburn? And I was just kind of confused. And obviously, as I grew up, I learned what that rivalry meant, what football means. So, yeah, it's great. It's cool to be close back to home, only about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from where I grew up. And obviously being able to cover an SEC program the size of Auburn is awesome.
I was a little late to pick because my parents went to North Carolina, and so I was just a Carolina fan when I was young. But, oh, yeah, in elementary school and stuff, and as you said, even in kindergarten, they're on you. You better pick one at some point, so that feeling is real. And he is Peter Rauterkus joining us today. Peter, again, of AL.com, and tell us what you got going on at AL.com, not only this week, but as we approach fall practice.
Yeah, obviously right now, wall-to-wall coverage of SEC Media Days, everything Auburn-related on my end. And then, as we get closer to fall camp starting in about 2 weeks, we'll have, just the normal preseason coverage, previewing everything going into what's going to be a really important and fun preseason camp heading into year one under Alex Golesh.
He is Peter Rauterkus joining us today on SportsCall. Peter, as always, the time is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to catching up with you again down the line.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
That is Peter Rauterkus here on SportsCall from SEC Media Days 2026.